"Made you something special, dear," Trevor said, setting the steaming mug down in front of me with that same overly cheerful tone he'd been using lately. The smell hit me immediately. Bitter, almost metallic. Nothing like the herbal teas I usually drank. "You're so kind," I replied, forcing a smile while my stomach churned with unease. "My name is Dana Wilkes. I'm 43 years old, and I've been married to Trevor for 8 years. We live in a modest 2-story house in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I work as a quality control manager at Sundale Financial. For the past 3 months, our lives had been turned upside down by an unwelcome houseguest, Kenny, Trevor's younger brother, who had moved into our spare room after his latest girlfriend kicked him out. As I stared at the suspicious tea, Kenny slouched into the kitchen wearing nothing but basketball shorts, his usual smirk plastered across his face. At 35, he acted like he was still in college, and he never missed an opportunity to make snide comments about my uptight personality or my boring job. "Morning, Dana," he drawled, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. "Still drinking that fancy health crap, I see." Trevor quickly poured Kenny a cup from the same pot he'd used for mine, his movements slightly hurried. Something about his behavior felt off, but I couldn't quite place what. "Actually, I made this blend special for Dana," Trevor said, avoiding eye contact with me. "It's supposed to help with stress." The way he emphasized the word made my skin crawl. I'd been dealing with increasing anxiety lately, mostly due to Kenny's constant presence and Trevor's growing distance from me. But this tea smelled nothing like any stress relief remedy I'd ever encountered. Kenny plopped down at the kitchen island next to me, his usual spot for making commentary about everything I did. "Stress, huh? Maybe if you loosened up a little, you wouldn't need magic potions." I bit my tongue, as I'd learned to do over the past few months. Fighting with Kenny only made Trevor defensive of his brother, and I was tired of being painted as the villain in my own home. As Trevor turned to put the teapot back on the stove, I made a split-second decision. With practiced stealth, I quietly slid my mug closer to Kenny's spot while sliding his toward mine. "Oops, mix them up," I said sweetly, handing Kenny the cup that had originally been intended for me. He shrugged and took a long gulp, as if it were soda rather than hot tea. "Tastes weird," he muttered, but continued drinking. I watched him carefully, noting how Trevor's shoulders tensed when he turned back around and saw Kenny with my cup. The tension in the kitchen was palpable as I sipped from Kenny's original cup, plain black tea with nothing suspicious about it. Trevor kept glancing between Kenny and me, his jaw clenched in a way I recognized as barely controlled panic. Our marriage hadn't always been this strained. When we first met at a company mixer 5 years ago, Trevor worked as an accountant at Driftline Construction, and he seemed genuinely interested in my career and ambitions. He'd listened to my stories about catching financial discrepancies at work, praising my attention to detail and analytical mind. Back then, he called those qualities amazing rather than obsessive. Things began changing about a year ago when Trevor lost his job due to company downsizing. His confidence crumbled, and he started drinking more, spending days on the couch while I worked extra hours to cover our mortgage. When Kenny showed up 3 months ago, claiming he needed just a few weeks to get back on his feet, Trevor welcomed him with open arms despite my protests. Kenny had always resented me, probably because I refused to tolerate his juvenile behavior the way everyone else in Trevor's family did. At family gatherings, he'd make jokes about my stick up my ass and how I was changing his brother. Trevor would laugh along, leaving me to sit there humiliated and alone. But lately, Kenny's comments had taken on a darker edge. He'd started making references to how much better off Trevor would be without me, how I was holding him back from his true potential. Last week, I'd overheard him on the phone with someone, talking about how I had a decent life insurance policy, and how Trevor deserved to start fresh. That conversation had prompted me to start being more careful around both of them. I'd begun keeping a small digital recorder in my purse, documenting some of their more concerning conversations. I'd also contacted my old friend Jessica, who worked as a paralegal, asking hypothetical questions about suspicious behavior and evidence collection. "You know," Kenny said, setting down his mug and wiping his mouth, "this stuff really does taste awful. You sure you know what you're doing with these tea experiments, Trevor?" Trevor's face had gone pale. It's an acquired taste. Maybe you should drink some water." "I'm fine," Kenny waved him off. "Takes more than some bitter tea to knock me down." I continued sipping my safe cup while observing the growing panic in my husband's eyes. Whatever had been in that original tea, it wasn't meant to be a harmless stress reliever. The metallic smell, Trevor's nervous behavior, and his obvious distress at seeing Kenny drink it all pointed to something far more sinister. 20 minutes had passed since Kenny finished the suspicious tea when he suddenly doubled over. "Oh, God," Kenny gasped, clutching his stomach as sweat beaded across his forehead. "Something's really wrong." He stumbled from the kitchen island to the living room couch, his face turning an alarming shade of green. Trevor rushed after him, his panic no longer concealed. "What's happening to him?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. I pulled out my phone, pretending to consider calling for help while actually starting the voice recording app. "I don't know," Trevor stammered, kneeling beside his brother. "Maybe he ate something bad. Kenny, what did you have for dinner last night?" Kenny could barely speak through the waves of nausea. "Nothing. Different." "Trevor, what was in that tea?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Trevor's eyes darted to me, then back to his brother, his mouth opening and closing without words. "Trevor," I said calmly, never breaking eye contact with my husband, "what exactly was in that tea you made for me?" His face went completely white. In that moment, I saw the truth written across his features: guilt, fear, and the dawning realization that his plan had gone horribly wrong. Kenny's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His breathing became shallow, and he started shaking uncontrollably. "Call ambulance," he managed to whisper. I dialed 911, speaking clearly and calmly to the dispatcher, while keeping my phone positioned to catch every word. "My brother-in-law is experiencing severe stomach pain and nausea after drinking tea. He's sweating profusely and seems to be having difficulty breathing." While we waited for the paramedics, I carefully moved to the kitchen and used a clean plastic bag to preserve what remained of the original teapot and the mug Kenny had drunk from. Years of quality control work had taught me the importance of evidence preservation. "Dana, what are you doing?" Trevor asked, his voice cracking. "Making sure the doctors have everything they need to help Kenny," I replied evenly. "They'll want to know exactly what he consumed." The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by a police car, standard procedure for potential poisoning cases, the officer explained. As the paramedics worked on Kenny, loading him onto a stretcher, I approached the responding officer. "Officer Martinez," I said, reading his name tag. "I think you should know that my husband prepared this tea specifically for me, but my brother-in-law drank it by mistake." Trevor's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with horror at my words. "Ma'am, we'll need to take statements from both of you," the officer replied, already reaching for his notepad. As they wheeled Kenny out to the ambulance, I caught Trevor's arm. "The truth has a way of coming out," I said quietly, so only he could hear. "You might want to think about that." The look of pure terror in his eyes told me everything I needed to know about what had really been in that tea. At the hospital, I sat in the sterile waiting room while doctors worked to stabilize Kenny. Trevor paced nearby, his hands shaking as he repeatedly checked his phone. The police had taken our initial statements, but I knew they'd be back with more questions once they determined what had poisoned Kenny. "Mrs. Wilkes?" A doctor approached us with a grim expression. "I'm Dr. Henderson. Your brother-in-law is stable for now, but we found concerning levels of antifreeze compounds in his blood." Trevor dropped into a chair like his legs had given out. "Antifreeze, ethylene glycol, was a particularly insidious poison. It initially tasted sweet, which would explain why Kenny had been able to drink the entire cup despite complaining about the bitterness. The bitter metallic smell I'd detected must have been from something Trevor added to mask the antifreeze taste. Antifreeze? I repeated, feigning shock. How could that be possible? Dr. Henderson's expression was serious. This appears to be intentional poisoning. The police will need to investigate your home and any beverages consumed this morning. Trevor's face had gone beyond pale to a sickly gray color. I reached over and squeezed his hand, playing the concerned wife perfectly. Honey, you look terrible. This must be such a shock. What Trevor didn't know was that I'd been documenting suspicious behavior for weeks. Hidden in my home office was a small safe containing printed emails, photographs, and recorded conversations that painted a very different picture of my loving husband. It had started a month ago when I'd accidentally opened a piece of mail addressed to Trevor, a confirmation for a life insurance policy increase on me. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was just being responsible and planning for the future. But the timing, combined with Kenny's increasingly hostile comments about my holding Trevor back, had made me suspicious. I'd begun paying closer attention to their conversations, especially the late-night talks they thought I couldn't hear from upstairs. Using a baby monitor app on my phone, I'd recorded several disturbing exchanges where they discussed how my death would solve Trevor's financial problems and free him from our miserable marriage. The most damning recording was from just 3 days ago, when Kenny had joked about how accidents happen all the time, and Trevor had responded that he just needed the right opportunity. They'd laughed about it, as if planning my murder was some kind of twisted bonding activity. Mr. and Mrs. Wilkes? Detective Sarah Cross approached us, introducing herself as the lead investigator. We'll need to search your home and collect any beverages or containers that might be relevant to this case. Of course, I said immediately. We want to help in any way we can. This is just so frightening. The idea that someone could have poisoned Kenny in our own home. Trevor remained silent, staring at the floor. Mr. Wilkes, Detective Cross addressed him directly. I understand you prepared the tea that your brother consumed? Yes, but it wasn't meant for him, Trevor stammered. I made it for Dana, but somehow the cups got mixed up. The detective's eyebrows raised slightly. So you're saying this poison was intended for your wife? I watched Trevor realize his mistake, how his attempt to deflect suspicion had actually made things worse for him. No. I don't know how the antifreeze got in there. Maybe someone broke into our house, or maybe it was contaminated somehow. His story was falling apart in real time, and we all knew it. Detective Cross took detailed notes while I maintained my shocked and confused expression. Mrs. Wilkes, did you notice anything unusual about the tea when your husband served it to you? Actually, yes, I said thoughtfully. It smelled odd, metallic, not like any tea I'd had before. That's why I was hesitant to drink it. The search of our home yielded exactly what I'd expected it would. Detective Cross and her team found the antifreeze container in Trevor's workshop, with his fingerprints clearly visible on the cap. They also discovered internet search history on his laptop detailing ethylene glycol poisoning symptoms and detection methods. But what they didn't find was the evidence I'd been carefully collecting for weeks. Mrs. Wilkes, would you mind coming to the station to give a more detailed statement? Detective Cross asked as the search concluded. Absolutely. I want to help however I can, I replied, grabbing my purse, the one containing my digital recorder and the key to my office safe. At the police station, I sat across from Detective Cross in a small interview room, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I need to be completely honest with you, I began, my voice trembling just enough to suggest emotional distress. I've been worried about my safety for weeks now. Detective Cross leaned forward, her attention fully focused. My husband has been acting strangely since he lost his job, and his brother Kenny has been living with us. making these awful comments about how I'm ruining Trevor's life. Last week, I overheard them talking about my life insurance policy. I paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. I was scared, so I started recording some of their conversations. I know it sounds paranoid, but after this morning, I think my instincts were right. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from 3 days ago. Kenny's voice filled the room. Accidents happen all the time, you know. People drink the wrong things, slip and fall, all kinds of unfortunate events. Trevor's response was even more damning. I just need the right opportunity, something that looks natural. Detective Cross's expression grew increasingly serious as she listened to more recordings. In one, Kenny suggested that my accident should happen soon, because he was tired of living in this depressing house with that uptight witch. In another, Trevor complained about how my controlling nature was preventing him from accessing our joint savings account to pay Kenny's debts. There's more, I said quietly, producing a key from my purse. I've been keeping copies of emails and documents in a safe at home. I was planning to talk to a lawyer next week, but after what happened to Kenny... The detective's eyes widened as I explained about the life insurance policy increase, the suspicious online purchases on Trevor's credit card, and the pattern of escalating verbal abuse that had made me fear for my safety. "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" she asked. "I wasn't sure anyone would believe me," I admitted. Kenny can be very charming when he wants to be, and Trevor had everyone convinced that I was just being paranoid because of work stress. I thought I needed more evidence before I could prove what they were planning. Detective Cross studied me carefully. "Mrs. Wilkes, you realize that if your husband intended to poison you and your brother-in-law drank it instead, that's attempted murder?" "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just can't believe the man I married could actually try to kill me. But the evidence speaks for itself." What the detective didn't need to know was how carefully I'd orchestrated this entire scenario. How I'd deliberately mentioned Trevor's special tea routine to Kenny the night before, knowing his competitive nature would make him want to try whatever was too good for him. How I'd practiced switching the cups until I could do it seamlessly. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting someone's own evil plans destroy them. The next several hours unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Detective Cross retrieved the evidence from my home safe, including emails between Trevor and Kenny discussing getting rid of the problem and researching undetectable poisons. The digital paper trail was extensive and damning. Trevor was arrested that evening at the hospital, where he'd been maintaining his vigil beside Kenny's bed. Not out of brotherly love, but out of fear that Kenny might wake up and implicate him. The irony wasn't lost on me that his attempt to appear caring had actually made him look more suspicious. "Mrs. Wilkes," Detective Cross called me with an update the following morning. "Your brother-in-law regained consciousness overnight. He's corroborating your account of events and has provided additional information about your husband's plans." It seemed that Kenny, faced with the reality of nearly dying, had decided to save himself by confessing everything. He admitted to pressuring Trevor to do something about me, claiming that my controlling behavior and financial management were preventing Trevor from lending him money for his mounting debts. According to Kenny's statement, they had originally planned to make my death look like an accident. But Trevor had grown impatient when I started questioning the increased life insurance policy. The antifreeze poisoning was meant to appear like I'd accidentally consumed contaminated tea, a tragic mishap that would leave Trevor a grieving widower with a substantial insurance payout. "There's something else," Detective Cross continued. "We found additional evidence in your husband's workshop. It appears this wasn't his first attempt to harm you." My blood ran cold despite knowing I should be safe now. "What do you mean?" "We found evidence that he'd been adding small amounts of prescription sleep medication to your coffee for weeks. Not enough to seriously harm you, but enough to make you appear more forgetful and unstable. He was building a case for you being mentally incompetent." The revelation explained so much. My recent struggles with memory, the fatigue I'd attributed to stress, the way Trevor had started pointing out my mistakes to friends and family. He'd been systematically undermining my credibility while slowly poisoning me. We believe he was planning to escalate gradually until he could claim you'd accidentally overdosed on your own medication, the detective explained. The antifreeze was likely plan B when the slow poisoning wasn't working fast enough. I sat in stunned silence, processing the full scope of Trevor's betrayal. Not only had he planned to murder me, but he'd been mentally and physically abusing me for months in preparation. Mrs. Wilkes, I want you to know that your quick thinking and evidence collection may have saved your life, Detective Cross said. Without those recordings and documents, we might not have been able to prove premeditation. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Trevor had tried to poison me less than 24 hours ago, and felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd outsmarted him, protected myself, and ensured that justice would be served. But I'd also lost the man I'd thought I loved, discovered that my marriage had been a lie, and learned that someone I'd trusted implicitly had been slowly killing me. The house felt different now, quieter, and somehow cleaner without Trevor and Kenny's toxic presence. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely in my own home. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my paralegal friend. Saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I smiled as I typed back, I'm safe now, and I think I'm going to be just fine. 6 months later, I stood outside the courthouse steps, breathing in the crisp autumn air of Charlotte. The trial had concluded with Trevor receiving a sentence of 25 years for attempted murder, and Kenny getting 5 years as an accessory. Justice had been served, but my real revenge was just beginning. During the trial, every detail of their plan had been exposed to public scrutiny. The media had dubbed it the anti-freeze murder plot, and the story had spread throughout our community and beyond. Trevor's reputation was permanently destroyed. His family had disowned him, and he'd lost everything: his freedom, his marriage, and any hope of the insurance money he'd killed for. But the most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't his imprisonment. It was watching him realize, piece by piece, how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered him. The prosecution had presented my evidence methodically. The recordings that proved premeditation, the digital trail showing his research into poisons, and the documentation of his previous attempts to slowly poison me with sleep medication. Trevor's defense attorney had tried to paint me as a manipulative wife who'd driven him to desperation. But the evidence spoke louder than any character assassination. What truly devastated Trevor, though, was learning how long I'd been aware of his plans. During my testimony, I'd calmly explained how I'd suspected something was wrong weeks before the antifreeze incident. I'd described installing the baby monitor app, setting up the hidden recorder, and carefully documenting his every move. You see, Your Honor, I'd said, looking directly at Trevor across the courtroom. My husband always underestimated my intelligence. He thought I was just an uptight, controlling wife who paid too much attention to details. But those details are what saved my life. The look of absolute defeat in Trevor's eyes when he realized I'd been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time was worth every sleepless night I'd spent gathering evidence. He'd planned my murder for months, but I'd planned his downfall even longer. With Trevor behind bars and Kenny serving his sentence, I was finally free to reclaim my life. The first thing I did was sell our house. The place held too many dark memories, and I wanted a fresh start. I used the proceeds to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Charlotte, complete with a garden where I could grow my own herbs for tea. The irony wasn't lost on me. My job at Sundale Financial had been understanding throughout the ordeal, and my supervisor had even offered me a promotion to Senior Quality Control Manager. My skills in identifying discrepancies and maintaining meticulous records had proven invaluable, both professionally and personally. I'd also started volunteering with a local domestic violence organization, helping other women recognize the warning signs of abuse that I'd initially missed. Many of them were surprised to learn that poison was more common in domestic violence cases than people realized, and that emotional manipulation often preceded physical harm. The thing about abusers, I'd tell the women in our support group, is that they always underestimate their victims. They think we're too weak, too trusting, or too scared to fight back. But sometimes, the best defense is letting them defeat themselves. My story had become something of a local legend. The quality control manager who'd applied her professional skills to catch her would-be murderer. Several women had reached out to thank me for showing them that they weren't powerless, that careful planning and documentation could protect them from dangerous partners. The cottage felt like a sanctuary after years of walking on eggshells around Trevor and Kenny. I could drink my morning tea without fear, work in my garden without looking over my shoulder, and sleep peacefully knowing that the only person who could hurt me now was safely locked away. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And I had ensured that Trevor would spend decades regretting the day he'd underestimated Dana Wilkes. As I tend to my herb garden now, brewing my own safe blends each morning, I often reflect on how my methodical nature, the very trait Trevor found so insufferable, became the weapon that destroyed his evil plans and secured my freedom.